Hello, and welcome to the This Happened Today in History podcast. I am your host, Mr. Miller. This podcast will cover a number of topics that happened on this date in history. Please visit the podcast webpage at thishappenedtoday.buzzsprout.com. There you can download the notes page, which will help you organize the information as well as develop your own ideas on how these events change the world around us. If you're interested in hearing more, please consider subscribing so you will not miss out on what happens tomorrow in history. Today is April 4th. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 1906 killed more than 100 people and ejected the most lava ever recorded from a Vesuvian eruption. Eruptions count as major or minor and everything in between, depending on the extent to which they are explosive or effusive, how much ejecta they produce, and to the extent to which they change the profile of the volcano, blowing bits and pieces out of the way, adding new craters, new lava flows, etc. Thus, the eruptions of 1929 and 1926 were minor, but they did, for example, add a few new craters and damage to nearby structures. There was also geologic activity of a different nature near Naples in that period. A major earthquake struck the region in 1930, and earthquakes are not necessarily related to volcanism, but at least in this area, that is a possibility. The eruption in April of 1906 was massive and attracted worldwide attention. It killed 100 persons and buried nearby towns. The initial rumblings, however, caused little alarm, and locals just joked that the mountain was just preparing for a royal welcome for her British King Edward, due to Naples for a visit shortly. He made it just in time for an eruption that dropped the ridge of the main cone some 250 meters, according to Professor Raffaele Vittorio Matucci, the director of Vesuvius Observatory. The eruption covered the city of Naples itself with ash and made the roads near the volcano impassable. Residents of destroyed villages fled to Naples or to nearby towns. The eruption was followed by heavy rains that produced what geologists now call lahar. It's an Indonesian word. It is a massive mud-like slide of ash and water that buries everything in its path. The eruption created a historic and heroic mythology around the persons of Matucci and his U.S.-American associate Frank A. Perret, who stuck to their stations in the observatory to gather data while hell raged around them. Some sources reported at the time that it was the most massive eruption since the great explosion that destroyed Pompeii and Herculaneum in 79 AD. That may be an exaggeration since the 1872 and 1631 eruptions were likely to have been at least as powerful. Matucci's presence on the slopes during the eruption and his constant messages of reassurance to the population of Naples were credited with avoiding a general panic. In 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, also known as NATO, is established by 12 Western nations: the United States, Great Britain, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, Italy, Luxembourg, Norway, Iceland, and Canada and Portugal. It was formed in 1949 with the signing of the Washington Treaty. NATO is a security alliance of 30 countries now from North America and Europe. NATO's fundamental goal is to safeguard the Allies' freedom and security by political and military means. NATO remains the principal security instrument of the transatlantic community, an expression of its common democratic values. It is the practical means through which the security of North America and Europe are permanently tied together. NATO enlargement has furthered the U.S. goal of a Europe whole, free, and at peace. Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, that an attack against one ally is an attack against all, is at the core of the alliance, a promise of collective defense. Article 4 of the treaty ensures consultations among allies on security matters of common interest, which have expanded from a narrowly defined Soviet threat to the critical mission in Afghanistan, as well as peacekeeping in Kosovo and new threats to security such as cyber attacks and global threats such as terrorism and piracy that affect the alliance and its global network of partners. In addition, its traditional role in the territorial defense of allied nations, NATO leads the UN-mandated International Security Assistance Force, the ISAF, in Afghanistan and has ongoing missions in the Balkans and the Mediterranean. It also conducts extensive training exercises and offers security support to partners around the globe, including the European Union in particular, but also the United Nations and the African Union. In 1973, New York's World Trade Center, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, rising 1,350 feet above Manhattan, officially became the world's tallest buildings. The Twin Towers were the centerpieces of the World Trade Center complex. At 110 stories each, 1 WTC, the North Tower, and 2 WTC, the South Tower, provided nearly 10 million square feet of office space for about 35,000 people and 430 companies. They were the tallest buildings in New York City, and for a brief period upon their completion, they were the tallest buildings in the world. They attracted roughly 70,000 tourists and commuters every day. The North Tower rose 1,368 feet and up to 1,730 feet with a large antenna, and the South Tower stood 1,362 feet high. On a clear day, views extended 45 miles from the top of the towers in every direction, far enough to see all 5 of the New York City boroughs, New Jersey, and Connecticut. The towers were massive. Each weighed more than 250,000 tons, contained 99 elevators, had 21,800 windows. Each floor was an acre in size, and there was enough concrete in the towers to build a sidewalk from New York City to Washington, D.C. The complex even had its own zip code, 10048. The 2 towers were surrounded by 5 other buildings that comprised the World Trade Center complex. The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey had a police desk at 5 World Trade Center, while 3 World Trade Center was a hotel with office space. The Twin Towers were completed in 1973, though tenants began to arrive in December of 1970. The other buildings were built over the next 14 years. In February of 1993, terrorists with links to an Islamic extremist group detonated explosives in a van parked underneath the World Trade Center. 6 people were killed and thousands were injured. You have been listening to the This Happened Today in History podcast. I thank you for listening, and I hope that you have enjoyed learning about historical events from the past. Thank you to the following websites for their information regarding today's topics: thepeoplehistory.com, Mount Vesuvius eruptions at naplesldm.com, All About NATO at nato.usmission.gov, and the World Trade Center history at 911memorial.org. The music used as the background track for this podcast is Americana, created by Kevin MacLeod on Incompetech.com. If you enjoyed this information and would like to hear more, please consider subscribing, as this will keep the historical events in your feed in the morning for each day. I hope you have a great day.